The wind was biting, pulling at the edges of my cabin's worn roof like a hungry animal, but inside, the night felt still. Just a few days before Christmas, in December 1991, I'd been alone for a while. Too long, maybe. I didn't think much of it, not at first, not until that night. The snow had fallen heavy, everything outside blanketed, suffocating the usual sounds of the forest near the Cascades. I was sitting by the fire, reading a book, when the knock came. I froze. Not the usual knocks. These were deeper, slower, like something was waiting for me to answer. I shouldn't be telling you this, but it's been over 30 years, and I still hear it sometimes, those knocks. I thought I was losing my mind, but the truth is, I wasn't. What I saw that night changed everything. I've got a clip, still on my old camcorder, but I won't share it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Before we continue this shocking story, we encourage you to subscribe to the channel, and we are about to hit 100 subscribers. Thank you all for your support. It was supposed to be just another cold winter night in the Cascades. I'd lived out there for years, remote, quiet, a hunter's haven tucked between ridges that kept the world at arm's length. The snowstorm came out of nowhere that December, covering everything in thick white silence. My nearest neighbor was 3 miles down a logging road that barely got plowed. My wife had passed away 6 years earlier, and the kids were grown, living their own lives in Portland and Seattle. The loneliness had long since settled in like furniture I'd stopped noticing. I didn't mind it most of the time. I'd learned the language of the woods, wind through Douglas fir, elk moving through clearings, coyotes calling at dusk. But this night felt different. The storm had an edge to it, pressing against the windows like it wanted in. Around 9 p.m., I was sitting by the fire with a paperback western when the first knock came. It wasn't the wind. Wind doesn't knock 3 times with spaces between. Wind doesn't wait. I set the book down and listened. Nothing but the fire crackling and snow sliding off the metal roof. I told myself it was a branch, maybe ice breaking, but my hands were shaking when I picked the book back up. I didn't get up to check. That was mistake number 1. The second set of knocks came an hour later, louder, more deliberate. 3 slow impacts that made the door frame rattle in its weathered housing. I grabbed my rifle from above the mantel and moved to the window. Outside, the porch light showed nothing but falling snow and the dark wall of trees beyond. No tracks leading up the steps, no shadow moving away, just white silence pressing in from all sides. I called out through the door, "Who's there?" My voice sounded thin against the storm. No answer, just that heavy quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing. I checked every window, locked the door, wedged a chair under the knob. I told myself it was the isolation getting, to me, cabin fever from too many weeks alone, but I knew better. Something wasn't right with those knocks. The next morning, the storm had moved through, leaving everything buried under 2 feet of fresh powder. The sun came up cold and bright, turning the world into a field of diamonds. I pulled on my boots and coat and stepped outside to survey the damage. Fallen branches everywhere, the woodshed door hanging open, fence posts leaning under the weight of snow. That's when I saw them. Footprints. They started at the tree line, came straight to my porch, then circled the cabin before heading back into the forest. Not bear tracks. Not elk or deer. These were too big, too human-shaped, but wrong in ways I couldn't immediately place. Each print was maybe 18 inches long, wider than my boot, pressed deep into the snow. 5 toes visible in the clearest ones. The stride between them was longer than any man could manage. I stood there for a long time, coffee going cold in my mug, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I'd tracked animals my whole adult life. I knew black bear, grizzly, mountain lion, every deer and elk that moved through these mountains. This matched nothing in my experience. I didn't mention it to anyone. The Hendersons down the logging road had their stories, night sounds, things moving past their motion lights. their dog refusing to go outside after dark. People in town laughed about it. Oh, that Bigfoot talk again. Like it was a joke you told to tourists. But standing there in my yard, looking at those prints that shouldn't exist, something shifted in me. A quiet belief I didn't have words for yet. I spent the afternoon following the trail. It led into the old growth section where the trees grew thick enough to block most of the snow. The prints became harder to track on the forest floor, but I found other signs. Broken branches at 8 feet high, scratch marks on bark, a smell I couldn't place, musky, wild, but not like any animal I'd encountered. By the time I turned back toward the cabin, the sun was dropping behind the western ridge. The temperature fell with it. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling watched in a way that made my skin crawl. Nothing moved in the trees behind me, but the feeling didn't leave. That night, I left the porch light on and slept with the rifle next to the bed. The knocking came again on the third night. This time I was ready, or thought I was. It started around midnight. 3 deliberate impacts on the cabin's back wall, not the door. I was out of bed before the third one finished, rifle in hand, flashlight clicking on. I moved through the cabin checking windows. Nothing. I opened the back door slowly, sweeping the light across the yard. Fresh prints in the snow, still settling. Whatever made them had been there seconds ago. The flashlight beam caught something else, a pile of broken branches stacked deliberately against the woodshed. Not fallen, stacked. Like someone had built a marker or left a message in a language I didn't understand. I stepped onto the back porch, my breath clouding in the cold air. The forest felt alive in a way it usually didn't. Watching, waiting. I wanted to call out, but my throat had gone dry. Then I felt it. A vibration in the porch boards under my feet. Something heavy moving just beyond the light's reach. The hairs on my neck stood up. I raised the rifle, not aiming, just holding it ready. "I don't want trouble," I said to the darkness. My voice sounded too loud. The vibration stopped. For maybe 10 seconds, everything held still. The wind, the trees, even my own heartbeat seemed to pause. Then I heard it. A sound like breath, but deeper, resonating from a chest, bigger than human. Not aggressive, almost curious. I stood there until my hands started shaking from cold and adrenaline. Whatever was out there didn't move closer, didn't move away, just breathed in the darkness beyond my small circle of light. Finally, I backed into the cabin and locked the door. I sat in the kitchen until dawn, rifle across my lap, listening to silence. No more knocks came that night, but I knew it was still out there. I could feel it the way you feel someone watching you through a window. In the morning, I found more stacked branches by the tree line, and something else. A cluster of pine cones arranged in a spiral pattern on a flat rock near the path. Deliberate, intentional, like someone had left me a gift I didn't know how to accept. I should have called the Forest Service then, should have reported it to someone with authority and better sense than mine. But I didn't. I couldn't explain why. Some instinct told me that bringing officials here would break something fragile that was trying to form. 2 days later, I found it. The baby. I'd gone out to check my trap line along the northern ridge. The snow had crusted over, making walking easier, but noisier. Every step crunched loud enough to announce me to everything within a mile. I wasn't expecting to find anything in the traps. The big snow usually drove game to lower elevations. But I heard something. A sound like mewling, like a pup or kitten in distress. I followed it off the trail, pushing through snow-heavy brush until I reached a cluster of fallen logs near a rock outcrop. There, wedged in the space between 2 moss-covered trunks, something moved. At first glance, I thought it was a bear cub. Dark fur, about the size of a year-old black bear, maybe 20 pounds. But when I got closer, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a bear. The face was too flat, too human-shaped. The eyes were large and dark, tracking my movement with an intelligence that made me stop breathing. Its tiny hands, and they were hands, not paws, clutched at the air weakly. It was shivering badly, covered in half-frozen mud. One leg looked twisted wrong. It made that sound again, a high keening that went straight through my chest. I stood there for a long time, rifle hanging useless in my grip, trying to process what I was seeing. My rational mind said it couldn't be real, but my eyes and ears told me different. This thing was dying, and it was looking at me like it knew I was its only chance. I set the rifle down and moved closer. It didn't try to run. Couldn't run, probably. I stripped off my jacket and wrapped it around the shivering body, lifting it carefully. It weighed less than I expected, all bones and matted fur under my hands. It pressed against my chest, seeking warmth. The walk back to the cabin took twice as long as it should have. I kept stopping to listen, expecting something to come crashing through the trees, expecting the mother to appear and tear me apart for touching her infant. But nothing came. The forest stayed quiet, except for my boots breaking through the crust and the small creature's labored breathing against my shirt. Inside the cabin, I built up the fire and made a nest of blankets near the hearth. The baby, I didn't know what else to call it, lay there shaking while I warmed milk and tried to get it to drink from a rag soaked in the liquid. It took some, not much. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt something else. Responsibility, like I'd been chosen for this without asking. I kept it alive for 3 days, fed it warmed milk and mashed up jerky softened in broth, cleaned its matted fur with warm washcloths, set its twisted leg as best I could with splints made from kindling and strips of torn bedsheet. It didn't fight me, just watched with those impossibly large eyes that seemed to understand everything. By the second day, it was moving better. The leg still dragged some, but it could pull itself around the cabin, exploring with small grunts of effort. It liked the spot under the kitchen table, where sunlight came through the window in the morning, would sit there for hours, turning its face toward the warmth. I talked to it while I worked, told it about my wife, about the kids, about how long I'd been living alone out here. It felt less crazy if I pretended it was just a weird-looking animal, not something that shouldn't exist. But I knew better. The way it watched me cook. The way it tried to mimic sounds I made. The way its small hands would reach for objects and examine them, turning them over with what looked like curiosity rather than instinct. On the third night, I heard them. Multiple voices in the woods. Not human voices. Deeper. More resonant. Calling back and forth in patterns that sounded almost like language. The baby sat up from its blanket nest, ears pricking forward, and made a sound I hadn't heard from it before. A chirping call that carried through the cabin walls. The voices stopped. Complete silence fell over the forest. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. The porch light showed nothing, but I could feel them out there. Multiple presences, waiting, watching. The air felt charged like before a lightning strike. The baby called again, louder, insistent. I made a decision then. Probably the only right one I'd made since this started. I scooped up the small creature, blanket and all, and carried it out onto the porch. It was calling continuously now, that high chirping sound full of need and recognition. I found him hurt, I called into the darkness. He's okay now. I'm bringing him out. I walked down the porch steps and set the bundle on the ground halfway between the cabin and the tree line. The baby struggled free of the blanket and stood on unsteady legs, the splinted one still dragging but bearing weight now. It looked back at me once, those dark eyes catching the porch light. Then shadows moved at the edge of the trees, big shadows, multiple shapes that resolved into nothing clear when I tried to focus the flashlight on them. One separated from the group, moving forward into the small circle of light. Massive, 8 feet tall at least, covered in dark brown fur. The baby chirped and hobbled toward it as fast as its healing leg would allow. The large figure bent down, scooped up the baby with surprising gentleness, and turned back toward the trees. I thought that was the end. I was wrong. The large figure stopped at the tree line, turned back toward me. I couldn't see features in the darkness, just shape and size and the way it stood upright like a man but wasn't a man at all. We looked at each other across 30 feet of snow-covered ground. Then it made a sound, low and rumbling but not aggressive, almost like acknowledgement, like it was filing away my face, my scent, some essential fact of my existence. The baby chirped once more from its arms. Then they were gone, melting into the forest with barely a sound. I stood there shaking, and not from cold. I'd just seen Bigfoot. No, I'd seen multiple Bigfoot, a family group, and I'd returned their infant to them. The impossibility of it sat heavy in my chest. I went back inside and sat by the fire until dawn, trying to process what had happened. Everything I thought I knew about the world had shifted slightly left. There were things in these mountains that science said didn't exist, and one of them now knew my face. Over the next few weeks, I found gifts. That's the only word for them. A pile of fresh-killed salmon on my porch, still cold from the stream. A bundle of edible roots tied with grass. A deer haunch, cleaned and ready, hanging from my porch beam. Each time I found one, I'd stand in my doorway and call out a thank you to the empty trees. I felt stupid doing it, but it also felt necessary. The knocks continued, but different now, not demanding or threatening, more like check-ins. 3 knocks every few nights, always on the back wall near the woodshed. I started knocking back. 3 quick raps on the doorframe. The pattern would repeat once more, then silence until the next time. My neighbor Tom Henderson stopped by in late January, found me on the porch arranging pine cones in a spiral pattern, like the one I'd found that first week. "You okay, man?" he asked, eyeing the pine cones. "You're acting strange." "Just decorating," I said. Weak excuse. "Mary says she hears things at night, voices in the woods, says they sound almost human but not quite." He looked at me hard. "You hearing anything up here?" I thought about telling him, thought about describing the baby, the family group, the gifts. But I looked at his face and saw the same skepticism I'd carried my whole life before this started, before I knew better. "Just the usual forest sounds," I said. "Wind, animals. Gets in your head when you're alone too long." He nodded slowly, not quite believing me, but letting it drop. "Well, you need anything, we're just down the road." After he left, I found another gift. A chunk of obsidian, sharp-edged and black, placed carefully on the porch rail where I'd see it. I picked it up, felt its weight, and understood. This wasn't just gratitude anymore. This was communication, recognition, relationship, and I still wasn't ready to tell anyone about it. February brought another storm, worse than the December one that started everything. 3 days of heavy snow that buried the logging road and knocked out my phone line. I was snowed in completely, which didn't bother me much. I had firewood, canned goods, and a growing sense that I wasn't really alone out here anyway. On the second night of the storm, I woke to knocking. Not on the walls this time, on the bedroom window. I sat up fast, heart hammering. The window was 6 feet off the ground. Whatever was knocking was tall enough to reach it easily. I pulled back the curtain slowly. A face looked back at me through the glass. Large, covered in dark fur, broad, flat nose, deep-set eyes that caught the lamplight and reflected it back amber. The same one that had taken the baby. I was sure of it. Something in the eyes felt familiar. We stared at each other through the frosted glass. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt calm. Like this was a natural progression of something that started when I found that injured infant and chose kindness over fear. It lifted one massive hand and placed it flat against the window. The hand was twice the size of mine, covered in coarse dark hair, but the palm looked almost human. 5 fingers. Fingernails, not claws. I placed my own hand against the glass, matching its gesture. The cold bit through the barrier between us. We stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds. Then it lowered its hand, nodded once, a gesture so human it made my throat tight, and moved away from the window. I heard it walk across the roof, heard the snow sliding off in chunks. Then nothing. In the morning, I found massive prints circling the entire cabin, like it had checked every window, every door, every vulnerable point. Not threatening, protective, like it was standing guard during the storm. That's when I knew. This wasn't just gratitude. This was something more complex. These creatures, Bigfoot, though I barely let myself think, the word had decided I was worth protecting, worth knowing. And they were keeping watch the way I'd kept watch over their infant. The storm cleared on the 4th day. I snowshoed down to the Henderson place to use their phone, check in with my daughter in Portland. Everything felt different walking that trail. The forest wasn't empty anymore. It was full of presence, full of knowing eyes and careful movements just out of sight. Tom met me at the door looking haggard. "Something circled our house all last night," he said. "Big. Mary saw it through the window around 2 a.m., said it was walking upright, had to be 8 feet tall." I kept my face neutral. Probably a bear standing up. They do that sometimes. That's what I told her, but she's not buying it, wants to move back to town. I looked past him at the tree line, saw nothing, but felt them watching, making sure I was safe on my walk down, making sure the Hendersons were safe too. "It's just the isolation," I said. "Gets in your head." Spring came slow that year. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and muddy ground. I started finding new signs, twisted branches marking trails I'd never noticed before, stacks of flat stones balanced in impossible ways. Once, a complete shelter made of woven branches near the creek, large enough for something my size to sleep in, but positioned where something much bigger had clearly built it. I began leaving my own gifts, apples from my root cellar, smoked fish, a wool blanket I wasn't using. Each time I left something, it would be gone by morning, replaced by something else. A bundle of medicinal plants, a carved piece of wood that looked almost like a face, an eagle feather that must have taken months to find. We were having a conversation without words, building trust through offerings and responses. It felt ancient, this exchange, like humans had done this thousands of years ago before we forgot how. My daughter called in April. "Dad, you sound different. Happier, maybe." "Just spring coming," I told her. Winter was long. "You sure you're okay up there alone? We worry about you." I almost told her then. Almost said, "I'm not alone. I haven't been alone since December." But I caught myself. How do you explain this to someone who lives in a city, who thinks Bigfoot is a joke people tell around campfires? "I'm fine, honey. Better than fine." After I hung up, I walked out to the meadow behind the cabin where wildflowers were starting to push through the soil. I sat on a fallen log and waited. I'd been doing this more often, just sitting, being quiet, giving them space to show themselves if they wanted. The baby appeared first. Not a baby anymore. It had grown considerably, maybe 40 pounds now, moving better on the leg I'd splinted. It recognized me immediately, chirped that same sound from months ago, and bounded closer with puppy-like enthusiasm. The large one emerged from the trees more slowly, cautious, protective, but it didn't stop the young one from approaching me. That felt like trust. The young Bigfoot sat down 3 feet away and just looked at me. Its eyes were more brown now than black, intelligent and curious. It reached out slowly and touched my boot with one finger, like testing reality. I stayed still. Let it explore at its own pace. The large one watched from 10 feet away. I met its gaze and nodded, the same gesture it had given me through the window. It nodded back, clear, deliberate, communication. We sat there in the meadow for maybe 20 minutes, not doing anything, just existing in the same space. The young one eventually got bored and wandered off to investigate something in the grass. The large one followed at a distance. Before disappearing into the trees, it turned back and made that low, rumbling sound. Not a threat. A goodbye. I sat there alone again, watching the spot where they'd vanished. I'd been right that first night. The world had shifted, and I was okay with it. I started documenting things in June. Got my old camcorder from the closet, the one I'd used to film the kids when they were young. Started taking it on walks, hoping to capture something. Evidence. Proof. Even though part of me knew I'd never show anyone. One evening in late July, I got my chance. I was sitting on the back porch at dusk when the family group emerged from the trees. 3 of them now, the large one I knew, the young one, and another adult, slightly smaller, that I assumed was the mother. They moved through the meadow like shadows, pausing to forage for roots and berries. I grabbed the camcorder with shaking hands, turned it on, pointed it at them. Through the viewfinder, I watched the large Bigfoot teaching the young one how to dig for something in the soil. Patient, careful, exactly how I'd taught my own kids to fish. The young one looked up suddenly, saw me filming and chirped. The adults tensed. The large one stood to full height and looked directly at the camera. At me. I kept filming but lowered my stance, trying to appear non-threatening. For maybe 10 seconds, we were frozen like that. Then the large one made a decision. It went back to teaching the young one, deliberately ignoring the camera, letting me film, trusting that I wouldn't use it to bring harm. I got maybe 2 minutes of footage before they moved back into the forest. 2 minutes of clear, undeniable evidence that Bigfoot was real, that there was a family of them living in these mountains, that everything I'd experienced wasn't madness or isolation-induced hallucination. I watched the footage that night on my small TV. It was grainy, shot in failing light, but unmistakable. You could see the muscle movement under fur, the way the young one's hand curled around a root, the profile of the large adult's face as it turned slightly toward the camera. This would change everything if I showed it. Would bring researchers, hunters, tourists, media. Would destroy the quiet peace we'd built over these months. I rewound the tape and watched it again, and again. Each time I saw the moment where the large Bigfoot chose to trust me, chose to let me document them. That trust felt sacred, fragile, worth more than fame or validation. I put the camcorder back in its case and locked it in the closet. The tape stayed inside. I knew I'd never show it to anyone. Couldn't. This wasn't about proof. It was about relationship, about being allowed into something rare and strange and beautiful, about being trusted by creatures that had every reason to hide from humans and chose not to hide from me. That night, I found a gift on the porch, a perfect bird's nest, empty but intact, woven with grass and moss and what looked like strands of fur. I held it carefully, understanding the message. They were showing me their home, their lives, not as specimens to study but as neighbors sharing space. And I would keep their secret. August brought heat and fire season. The Forest Service issued warnings about controlled burns and lightning strikes. I kept the camcorder hidden but found myself watching the tree line more carefully, worried about smoke, about evacuation orders, about being forced to leave before I was ready. The Bigfoot family seemed to sense the tension. I saw them less often but found more signs. Stacked stones near the trail, bent saplings marking paths toward water sources. Once, a crude map scratched in the dirt near my porch, circles representing camps or caves, lines showing escape routes. They were showing me where they'd go if fire came, inviting me to follow if needed. Tom Henderson stopped by in late August with news. Fish and Wildlife is sending someone up here. Mary reported strange animal activity. They want to do a survey, set up trail cameras. My stomach dropped. When? Next week. Guy named Richards. Mary gave him our address, but he'll probably check the whole area. Might stop by your place. After Tom left, I hiked out to the meadow and left a warning. Drew a human figure in the dirt. Drew cameras. Made an X over everything. I didn't know if they'd understand. But that night, all the stacked stones disappeared. All the markers vanished. The twisted branches untwisted themselves or got removed. They'd understood. They were erasing evidence. Richard showed up on a Wednesday. Young guy, maybe 30, full of enthusiasm and trail cameras. Your neighbor reported some unusual activity. 8-foot bipedal figure, strange vocalizations. Probably just a bear, but we have to check it out. I showed him around my property, let him set up 2 cameras on the perimeter. Acted skeptical and helpful in equal measure. Haven't seen anything unusual myself, but I'm not here all the time. You're welcome to check. He left the cameras for 2 weeks. When he came back to collect them, he looked disappointed. Nothing, just deer and 1 black bear. Your neighbor must have seen the bear standing up and got spooked. Probably, I agreed. After he drove away, I found a gift on my back porch. The bird's nest from weeks before, but filled now with ripe huckleberries. A thank you for the misdirection, for keeping their secret. But the close call had shaken something in me. I started thinking about moving closer to town. Not because I wanted to, but because I was afraid of what might happen if people kept looking. If the wrong person found them. If someone came with guns instead of cameras. I sat on the porch that evening and thought about my wife, about the kids, about 30 years of living out here in self-imposed isolation, and about the last 8 months of not being isolated at all, of having neighbors that knocked and left gifts, of being part of something inexplicable. The large Bigfoot emerged from the trees at dusk, stood at the meadow's edge. We looked at each other across the distance. I stood up and knocked 3 times on the porch rail. It knocked back. 3 solid thuds of palm against tree trunk. Not goodbye, just acknowledgement. We're still here, still watching, still trusting. September brought the hunters. Opening day of rifle season turned the mountains into a patchwork of orange vests and gunshots echoing off ridges. I'd hunted these woods myself for years, but this year felt different. Every shot made me flinch. Every truck rumbling past on the logging road made my chest tight. The Bigfoot family disappeared completely. No knocks, no gifts, no signs. The forest felt empty in a way it hadn't since December. I knew they were still there, somewhere deeper in the wilderness, waiting for the humans to leave. But I missed them. Missed the quiet communication that had become part of my routine. I found myself leaving offerings anyway. Apples on the usual rocks, smoked fish wrapped in leaves, a note weighted down with a stone that just said, "Stay safe." I felt stupid writing it. They couldn't read, but maybe they'd understand the gesture. On the 3rd day of hunting season, I heard shots too close to my property, followed the sound, and found 3 hunters in the ravine north of my cabin tracking something through the brush. One of them was young, maybe 20, with a scope on his rifle that looked expensive. "What are you tracking?" I called down. "Something big," the young one said. "Saw it moving through here. Too big for deer. Maybe a moose." My blood went cold. There aren't moose in this area. Probably just a black bear. They can look bigger than they are in heavy brush. Maybe. But he didn't sound convinced. I stayed with them for the next hour, talking loud, making noise, accidentally kicking stones that rattled down the ravine ahead of us, doing everything I could to warn whatever they were tracking. Finally, they gave up and moved to different terrain. That night, the knock came. 3 soft raps on the back wall. I knocked back, flooded with relief. They were okay. Still here. Still willing to come close despite the danger. I found a gift in the morning. Just a single leaf, perfectly red, placed on my porch rail. Simple. But it felt like forgiveness, like they understood I'd tried to protect them, even if my methods were clumsy. The hunting season ended in late October. The mountains emptied out except for locals. The first snow came early, dusting the high ridges, and the Bigfoot family came back. I saw the young one first, bigger again, maybe 60 pounds now, moving through the meadow with more confidence. The splinted leg had healed completely. It saw me on the porch and bounded over, stopping a few feet away. We'd established this boundary over months, close enough to communicate, far enough to respect each other's space. It chirped at me. That same sound from 10 months ago, when I'd first found it injured and freezing. But different now, stronger, full of health and life. The 2 adults appeared at the tree line, The large one nodded at me. The smaller one, the mother, I was certain now, made a low sound that might have been greeting or warning or both. They stood there in the fading light, and I felt something shift again. Not fear, not curiosity, something closer to family, to belonging, and I knew I couldn't leave. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The years that followed blurred together. The knocking continued through winters and summers, through storms and droughts, through seasons when I barely saw them, and seasons when they visited almost nightly. The young one grew into a sub-adult, nearly the size of its mother. New young ones appeared, twins one spring, small and playful and brave in ways that made me hold my breath watching them tumble near the tree line. I kept the camcorder locked away, never filmed again. The original tape sat in its case, unwatched, slowly degrading. Sometimes I thought about it, about the 2 minutes of proof I'd captured that July evening, about what it could mean for science or history. But then I'd hear the knocks, or find a gift, and I'd remember why I'd chosen silence. Tom and Mary Henderson moved to Bellingham in 2003, sold their place to a couple from Seattle who weekended there and never noticed the things that moved through the forest at night. I watched them come and go, their oblivious contentment a reminder of how I'd been once. Before I knew better, my daughter visited less as the years went on. Her kids grew up thinking Grandpa was a hermit who chose trees over people. They weren't wrong exactly, but they didn't understand that I wasn't alone out here, that I'd built a life that included things they couldn't imagine. I turned 65 in 2015, started thinking about mortality, about what would happen to this place when I was gone. Who would receive the knocks? Who would leave offerings and accept gifts? Who would keep the secret? I drafted a letter once, tried to explain everything. Started with, "I know how this will sound, but I need you to believe me." Got 3 pages in and realized how crazy it read, how impossible it sounded even to me, and I'd lived it. I burned the letter in the fireplace and watched 30 years of trust turn to ash. The large Bigfoot was older now, too. I could see it in the way it moved, a slight hitch in its gait, the fur around its face gone silver gray. But it still came, still knocked, still left gifts. The young ones, sub-adults now, came more often, curious about the human who'd been part of their lives since before they were born. One night in late 2023, I woke to knocking, not on the walls, on my bedroom door, inside the cabin. I sat up fast, heart pounding. The door opened slowly. The large Bigfoot stood there, ducking to fit through the doorframe. It shouldn't have been possible. I'd locked every door, every window. But here it was, inside my home, close enough to touch. We looked at each other in the darkness. It made that low, rumbling sound. Then it reached out one massive hand and placed something on my bedside table. A stone, smooth, river-worn, warm from its palm. It turned and left the way it came. I heard the back door open and close. In the morning, the door was locked from the inside like always, like maybe I'd dreamed it. But the stone was real, solid, undeniable. I moved to town 3 months ago, a small place in Cedro Woolley, close enough to visit the cabin, but far enough that I'm not alone in the woods anymore. My daughter helped me pack, found the camcorder in the closet. "You still have this old thing?" She turned it on, dead battery. The tape inside degraded beyond playback after 30 years. "Just memories," I said. "Nothing important." She dropped it in the donation box. I let her. The proof was gone. Maybe that was right. Maybe it was always supposed to disappear. But I go back sometimes. Drive up the logging road to the cabin that's slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Sit on the porch and wait. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear them. 3 knocks on the back wall. 3 knocks that mean I'm not forgotten. Last week, I found a gift on the porch rail. A perfect eagle feather. Fresh. Placed where I'd see it. They know I still come back. They're still watching. Still trusting. I don't know who'll get the cabin when I'm gone. Maybe no one. Maybe it'll just return to the woods. But I hope whoever finds it If anyone does, hears the knocks, answers them, leaves offerings, builds the relationship that took me 30 years to understand. People ask sometimes why I moved after so long out there. I say the isolation got to me. Say I wanted to be closer to family. They accept this because it sounds reasonable. But the truth is more complicated. I left because I was afraid of dying alone and them finding me. Afraid of what might happen if search parties came looking. Afraid of finally exposing them when I'd spent 3 decades protecting their secret. The stone from that last night sits on my windowsill here in town. Smooth, river-worn, impossible to explain. Sometimes I hold it and remember the weight of trust placed in my hands when I found that injured infant in the snow. Remember the choice I made to help rather than fear. Remember every knock and gift and silent acknowledgement that followed. I know what people think when they hear stories like this. I know how it sounds, but you have to trust me. I'm not crazy. There's a lot out there in the woods, things we don't understand, things that understand us better than we think. And sometimes, if we're lucky enough, those things find us. And when they do, we never forget. The Bigfoot that I knew, the large one with silver in its face and patience in its eyes, is probably gone by now. Old age takes everything, even creatures that shouldn't exist. But the young ones are out there still. The twins from 2008 are adults now, teaching their own offspring how to stack stones and leave gifts and trust the right humans. Sometimes, at 3 a.m., I wake up in my town apartment and think I hear it. 3 soft knocks, just at the edge of hearing, just enough to remind me. I knock back against the wall, 3 times, always 3, and I wait in the darkness for what might come next.